Final segment this morning. Thanks for joining us. Todd Matthews is with us all the way from Cookeville. He's an expert, if you will, along the lines of identifying, I don't know, bodies maybe that have not been finally identified, or finding missing persons and how that goes. I just don't know. I mean, when you're talking about missing persons, we were talking about Tabitha Tudors or any other case, I guess law enforcement relies on tips hugely, and you know this, being someone who handles the media for a lot of these organizations, is that there's kind of a coexistence between media and law enforcement, where we help each other. You guys have to be really careful about what you say. We want to help solve these cases, so you have to give us something. But it's so often, and I've said this on more than one occasion, it may turn out, we don't know who gave the tip that led to Evelyn Boswell's body being found on that property last week. But I've said all along, when you think it's cold, usually it's some citizen's tip that leads to the break in the case. Would you agree?
I would agree. Somebody knows something out there.
A tip somehow. Do you think rewards work?
I do think it's possible.
Really?
Now, I've not seen them work in every case.
Yeah.
But I have seen them where it was just enough.
So in some cases, someone thinking, well, I know the answer. Oh, there's $5 grand here. I can make the call because I know, and I'll get this reward.
Well, in law enforcement, usually know when a tip could, they have some circumstantial information. They think, a tip just might break this one.
Yeah. Now, how do you separate the tip, whether or not the tipster is someone who is involved in the darn crime? You know what I'm saying?
You really don't know.
That's the tricky thing. I'm thinking about this Evelyn Boswell case, depending on who called it in, and they're like, there's almost $70,000, $80,000 in reward money there, and they do this, and then the question I would have from law enforcement is, okay, thank you for the tip, we found the body. How did you know that?
Yeah, well, the volume can be so high.
Yeah.
And the tips can be dangerous too. We mentioned the one case where an officer died as a result of a tip, but it's just, they can be all over the place, and I've heard some of the same tips over and over again. There are so many cyber sleuths, but back in the day when I was new, there was a small handful, and they become very trusted confidants of law enforcement. I know some police officers that I still know today that we formed a bond, and with media. There's a lot of
people that you trust or whatever that you share information with.
I mean, because like when you work with somebody in the media for years, and they know, like, if they tell me something, it's a good thing. They got their ducks in a row, and they know. Same relationship with law enforcement at times. And if I call them with something, they're like, this seemed a little unique. You might want to listen to this. And you got that open channel of communication. You're already familiar. You're already introduced to them. So that really helped, especially in Kentucky. They knew me in Kentucky, and there was a lot of cases I could go back and forth with, and I felt like I brought them information at times, and they trusted me with information at times that helped me find more information. So that was an important relationship, very symbiotic relationship.
And most of those end up leading to prosecutions, or just the identifying of the individuals?
Usually I like to end the day with the identification, but now more and more I'm getting unfinished business. I'll use that word, unfinished business. I'm getting law enforcement that come back and say, okay, we made an identification, but I'd like to see more exposure put on how can we fully resolve this case. And and that's some of the stories that I'd like to tell at some point in time with the next chapter of my life. Maybe that's what I want to do.
It's interesting what you do is kind of like the forensics with online tools and all this. I asked you before the show if you've ever, I'm sure you've observed or seen how sometimes when bodies are found and then the skull, which is already just all the flesh is gone, it's just a skull, they send it to the body farm, and Dr. Bass, he now is emeritus, but he has staff, and that's amazing what they do at UT with the body farm, and how they're able to, with clay, sometimes rebuild a face, and oftentimes the result is very similar to what the face looked like. It helps identify someone.
It does, and it's a good visual. If you make sure that people are not trying to look at it as a portrait.
Yeah.
Like this isn't, it's an approximation.
Right.
Because I've had
like
people say,
a composite sketch or something like that. It's the best. Now they're basing it on the contours of the skull and what
very scientific, studies that they've done for years of research.
Right.
They want to find out the race, the potential age.
Right.
There's so many things that they could put in, but like we might not know exactly what the hair looks like. There's a hesitation to introduce colors that are unknown, even skin tones. People recognize, like, I might notice a color.
Well, how on earth do you tell what the color of the skin was when you just have a skull?
You won't know. You really won't know.
You don't.
So, I mean, that's why you see a lot of them in black and white. That's not introduced a specific tone.
Because that could throw someone off.
Birthmarks. That could be a birthmark.
Yeah, you don't know if there's a birthmark.
Facial hair.
But they can tell whether maybe deep-set eyes, or you know, if it's a jutting jaw, or maybe they can get a sense of the size of the nose. I don't know. The cartilage is gone, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, that stuff's pretty amazing when you just have a body and they just reconstruct it.
Well, and it's it's just like you said, it's like a police sketch. It's an approximation of that person. It's to maybe spark a memory, maybe cause a person to make that call. And it's not the call to the public, take a wild guess at it.
Right.
And that's what happens too often. It's like, we're not asking you to take a wild guess at it, and that frustrates law enforcement too. I think when they put these things out, if they give very specific instructions, like we're looking if this could potentially be somebody that you knew that was missing, not try to match a picture with somebody and take a wild guess at it. Because that could inundate the phone lines with calls, and you'll get the same one over and over again. And that, you know, I don't want to do anything that's going to frustrate law enforcement or make them say, just shut it off.
Right.
Just shut it off. And I've seen them do that with the volunteer community. When there's too much noise, it's like, okay, we no longer trust that community as much. So to properly ask for help is one thing that law enforcement can do. Like, give them instructions. What are you asking from the public? And that's what I want to try to help law enforcement do, is to make sure, what exactly are you asking of them? What's the best thing they can do for this case? You know, maybe not armchair sleuthing or speculation or finger pointing. Maybe it's sharing the information, sharing what you put out to make sure that people tell you that's the story they want to read. Yeah. Demographics.
Well, I'll tell you, what I like about what you do, or what they do at the Body Farm, you hear sometimes about perfect crimes, perfect murders, and they go, oh, it's perfect. Happens all the time. People get away with murder all the time. The thing about it is, murder has no statute of limitations, and that's what I like about it. Even 30 years later, you can get an ID on someone, and then maybe if they can ID it and then get a cause of death and start making links about who they knew, get to an arrest. And that's what's fascinating about watching what you do, what great detectives like Pat Pistiglione did for the Metro Police Department, or what Dr. Bass and his team do. You know, it's that they never give up on these things, and you just never know. If somehow, some way, Holly Bobo, if God forbid her remains were found or something, and they could use that to maybe find a way to lead to an arrest. Marcia Trimble, a very famous case here that years ago finally was solved. You just never give up, and that's exactly what you guys do.
Well, and sometimes these can be a lifetime commitment. I literally stood at a grave of a John Doe at 17, and I stood at his grave again when he had his name and he was being buried by his mother at 47. Yeah. So from a teenager to a grandfather. I never give up on those cases.
Yeah, you cannot give up. And you know what? The victims deserve not to, and so do the family members. Todd, this is awesome talking to you. It's good to see you again. I appreciate it. Keep us informed of what you're up to and all of that.
Stay in touch.
If we can do more of these shows, we will. Or if there's some case that comes up that's specific locally, we'd love to talk to you about it with as much as you can share, all right?
All right, I appreciate it.
Todd Matthews, we'll take a break. I will be back with the program you know about tomorrow right after this. Stay with us.